25 years I bored everyone to death saying we should leave the European Union. And if I was ever asked, what is your best single example of why the European Union is not good for the United Kingdom, the answer was simple: the common fisheries policy. Why? Well, under the international law of the sea, as set down in 1976 and agreed across the world, any nation has 200 miles of its fishing waters as its own exclusive economic zone for it to manage itself, or the median line. So, OK, it's 12 miles off Dover, but it's 200 miles off many parts of the North Sea. And that, under law, should be ours. But it's not, because we're part of the common fisheries policy with all the other European nations, and it divides fish stocks up on the principle of equal access to a common resource. And what I've seen over these years is an industry going, frankly, into terminal decline, a quota system that in many cases doesn't give the skippers enough legal catch to earn a proper living, but also leads to discards, to the throwing back of dead or dying fish on an absolutely huge scale. And you may remember, during the referendum, I had a little confrontation on the Thames with Bob Geldof, and we'll come to that a little bit later in the show. So back in August, I went down to Ramsgate and I met Eddie on his fishing boat, the boy Joshua, and the aim of the trip was to find out the impact of the common fisheries policy on our fishing stocks, on his ability to earn a living, something all is set and regulated by the European Union. Here was Eddie. I'm on boy Joshua. We've just come out of Ramsgate Harbour. It's a lovely, lovely morning, and we're heading out with what is left of our fishing fleet in this country. I'm here with Eddie. Eddie, where are we going today? What are we trying to do?
We're going about 7 miles northeast of Ramsgate. We're trying to catch some skate and some lobsters. Hopefully we'll be successful.
Now, that was all well and good, isn't it? And, of course, I love skate. I mean, skate to eat's absolutely delicious. But, as I understand it, there's a bit of a problem with the number of skate you're allowed to catch.
Yes, I mean, at the moment we're allowed to catch 375 kilos a month, which, unfortunately, is live weight, so you've got to gut it, so it's going to be less than that. And that is the highest quota we've actually had this year. Most of you have been on 200 kilos, but there is a real big problem. There's a lot more skate than the quota shows, really.
Yeah, and in fact what's happened is, and frankly round from sort of Norfolk, round to the Isle of Wight, there has been in the last few years a complete explosion in skate numbers. I, as a keen angler, know this. But isn't the truth of it that what you're having to do, whatever species you're trying to catch, you're catching skate? I mean, just explain to people, you're actually throwing stuff back dead, aren't you?
Absolutely. If we're fishing for soles or we're fishing for cod, all year round we're throwing skate away because unfortunately no one has developed a sign that the skate can read to say don't go in my nets.
So what we got here is something that I think anybody who thinks about sensible management or the environment has got to be horrified by. How many fish are you throwing back dead?
Quite a lot. Absolutely quite a lot. I mean, it depends. I mean, some we can get back alive, but at the end of the day, there are some that we can't get out of the net quick enough because there's that many of them.
Now, last year, Brexit, and I know that this particular boat was carrying Brexit flags, and you wanted to get back our waters. You know, a year on, do you feel optimistic that Brexit's going to go the right way for you?
I say I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated with the hang-ups and the hold-ups. I do think there's a lot of obstacles being put in the way by certain parts of the media and certain politicians. I believe that it's a little bit more straightforward than they're trying to make out, and we'll have to wait and see.
Well, one of the things I would like to see, you know, regardless of how long this whole process takes, is I would love to see us actually stopping a policy where we chuck stuff back dead that could be sold in the market and actually could be quite good cheap food for people, couldn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, skate used to be a very big catch for us up to about 2007, when our fishery department decided they were going to ramp up the rules and basically overnight try and destroy us. And I mean, there's just a few of us left now. I mean, we are a dying industry as it stands at the moment, when at the end of the day we could be a nice little local profitable business employing people and putting money into the community.
So Ramsgate, you know, here you are, right on the edge of the North Foreland, got some great fishing grounds here, albeit ones you have to share with the French and the Dutch and the Belgians and everybody else, and maybe Brexit will help with that. But just explain to me, how many fishermen are there now working out of Ramsgate, and how many were there, say, 20, 30 years ago?
I think now we're down to about 10 boats probably left. Of them 10 boats, there's 7 or 8 of us for fishing, 2 or 3 are lobster potting, whelk fishing all the time. Of those who are fishing, 2 or 3 of them now go single-handed because they can't afford to employ a crew on the amount of money that they're allowed to earn. And it's only going one way, downwards at the moment, and it's against good fish stocks in the sea that we're not allowed to target.
And this is the story that I think people don't quite get, is actually stocks of a lot of fish are remarkably good. I mean, herring stocks are very, very good, skate stocks have literally exploded, and even cod, in the northern North Sea at least, even the scientists say now we've reached back to sustainable levels. But if we're not allowed through quota to catch the stuff, then frankly, people in this industry can't earn a living. Now, we're a few miles out now, we're going to be putting up nets very shortly. What's going to be in them?
Well, hopefully some fish.
Right, we'll wait and see. Well, we'll find out in a moment what we did catch in those nets and what had to happen to those fish. Now, the big concern and the reason for this debate is that the government wants there to be a transition period, and all the signals we're getting are that we'll stay within the common fisheries policy, or at least within the rules-based system set by Brussels during that period. And I am concerned that if we stay in a transition for 2 or 3 years, that many, many more of what's left of our fishing industry will be forced out of business. I'm also very concerned for the hundreds of thousands of people in this country who go angling. They do it because they enjoy it. They do it because they want to take a fish home for tea. But they too provide lots of jobs in coastal communities. And I'll talk more at the bottom of the hour about the threat to anglers. Now, I did invite Environment Secretary Michael Gove to come onto the programme, but this was declined. I also wanted George Eustace, the Environment Minister, to come onto the show, and he also declined, but they were nice enough to send us this statement. As we have made clear, when we leave the European Union, we will leave the common fisheries policy. This gives us the opportunity to design a new domestic fishing policy, one which is in the UK's best interests and allows our industry to thrive. Yes, gentlemen, when is the question? They're not here, but I tell you who is here. Aaron Brown is here. He's a Scottish prawn fisherman, and he's head of the Fishing for Leave campaign group. Aaron, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
My understanding is that the government say we will leave the European Union at the end of March 2019, that we may even, in theory, leave the common fisheries policy, but we are to stay during that transition period with the same Brussels-based rules system. Is that your understanding too?
Yes, I would say it is. The question isn't so much, do we leave the common fisheries policy? Indeed, do we leave the European Union? We absolutely do. Legally, Article 50 means we're out. It's what we do thereafter is a problem, and that's where the transition's terrifying, because as Monsieur Barnier, Monsieur Juncker have said, we will have to obey the entire acquis. For people at home, that's all EU law. So effectively, we will have left, but we will be stuck in some sort of legal purgatory where we'll be obeying the same rules. And obviously the government conveniently will have adopted all those rules with the withdrawal bill. And our big concern as Fishing for Leave is that brings us under continuity of rights, and the EU is going to nail our feet to the floor and say, you left, you had your clean slate of Article 50, you've reacceded in a new deal, which the transition's part of, and therefore you'll still obey the common fisheries policy, immigration policy, agricultural policy. And by the time we get round to this new British policy, maybe at some point in the future, as you say, there'll be nobody left, especially with choke species and a discard ban. So it's really now or never for the fishing industry, and I really think the government's dawdling and ineptitude is leading this country as a whole, not just fishing, into a seriously dangerous position.
Yeah, I think we need I have to say, I genuinely think we need to leave the common fisheries policy as soon as possible, take back our territorial waters, and not just help our industry, but also actually to do something environmentally that makes sense. You know, for years we've had talk about discards, about the throwing back of dead and dying fish, and I know Hugh Fearnley-Woodingstall fought a very big, high-profile public campaign, but as I saw out of Ramsgate the other day, we're still discarding fish, aren't we?
There is a discard ban, but it's not enforced yet fully. The green groups are pushing hard for full enforcement, full CCTV monitoring, and one finds it quite hard to argue with them because it is the only way to stop discards with a quota system. But the fundamental problem is banning discards is banning the symptoms, not the cause, which is quotas. And it's a quota regime that's caused all these problems, and that's why we very stridently are pushing and have developed new UK policy that will be more environmentally friendly. It'll allow fishermen to have a better living, and it'll allow us to take that clean slate, because the discarding of fish is lunacy environmentally, because it's putting twice the pressure on the stocks it needs to happen.
And the Norwegians, of course, on the other side of the North Sea, you know, they've got their 200-mile limit, they police it in a very tough way, and not only do they ban the throwing back of anything dead, they've got a lot of wealthy fishermen, I understand.
Indeed, their industry's thriving. So when you see that we share the same, well, northern North Sea for us, they're southern grounds that join onto the North Sea as well, and they're doing very well, and our industry's going out the door, it's because of legislative ineptitude. So we can't environmentally or economically afford to keep the common fisheries policy going. We can't afford to do it constitutionally either. So I really hope that the rumours that Mr Gove's fighting hard in Cabinet to make a change are true. But no, the discard ban's a key thing. Pulse fishing's another. The bass ban is just unbelievable.
We're going to come on to pulse fishing, which will make anybody listening to this show who cares about the environment absolutely boil with rage. And anyone that likes going fishing would be pretty angry by what could happen to bass stocks as well. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:15.
Nigel Farage Show.
So I spent the day in August out of Ramsgate Harbour on the Boy Joshua boat with Eddie the skipper, and you can go to lbc.co.uk, you can see the video and pictures of my trip, what we did, what happened to the fish, plus you can find out why we were stopped briefly by the UK Border Force. So let's rejoin Eddie on that boat as we've shot the nets. We're now about to start drawing them in. So we're hauling nets, Eddie. How's it looking?
A bit slow at the moment, but hopefully it's going to improve. We're getting one or two.
What's that?
That is a lovely rock. And here's a bigger rock.
God, dear.
Oh, here's another skate.
Ah, here we go. Skate. This is what we're after.
Absolutely.
But you can't catch too many.
No, and as you watch, unfortunately, I'm going to say goodbye.
But that's a good eating fish. Why have you thrown that back?
Well, unfortunately, we got obviously. Oh, we got to. We have a quota for the month, and unfortunately, if we keep too many, we won't be able to go fishing later in the month for something else. So you've got to, use it wise, use your quota wisely.
Will those fish survive?
Some will, some won't. It's just the way the game is. It's absolutely terrible.
But it's a terrible waste, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not something that's obviously I'm happy about doing.
Pretty graphic.
How many is too many and all that?
So how many do you reckon you throw back a month?
Quite a few tons at times.
Quite a few tons?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the trouble is, you can be fishing for soles, and if the skate are on the ground and you don't know they're there before you shoot, then you end up catching loads of skate which you've got to throw away.
But don't these rules need changing pretty damn quickly?
Absolutely. They don't actually reflect what fish are on the ground.
Do you think
a lot of the quotas are they're designed for fishing that took place 30, 40 years ago, and everything's moved on since then.
Should I invite Michael Gove to come on the boat? Would you have a few words to say to him?
Quite possibly, yes.
I think that was a diplomatic answer for the first time ever from a UK fisherman. They normally speak their mind. He was very well behaved there, wasn't he? But yeah, we're hauling the nets and they're catching skates, and as I said earlier, fish do change over years. We've got an absolute explosion of thornback ray skates around the eastern part of England, and yet the quotas that are set annually in Brussels simply don't reflect what's out there. And when you think that boat with Eddie and his son on it, which is a boat that is just about 30 feet, just under 10 metres, when he says alone that boat is throwing back a few tons a month of skates, probably half of which are going to die and just rot on the seabed. There's something going wrong. I'm with Aaron Brown, the head of the Fishing for Leave campaign, and Aaron, you and I worked very hard together to try and make fisheries a big issue in the referendum, and indeed the Wednesday before the vote. You gave us a huge hand in bringing boats together from right across the United Kingdom to come up the Thames and to parade outside Westminster. Was that an important day for your industry?
I think massively so. I think without that and the help you did with the publicity for us, which was huge, that fishing would have probably been lost in the wilderness just now. However, I think the British people have always known there is something endemically wrong with fishing, that coastal communities have been devastated from our membership of Europe and sold out by Ted Heath in 1973. And I really think that it is now perceived as one of the acid tests. It epitomises the surrender of the country to Europe, and it's really going to epitomise whether we actually have a clean, successful Brexit.
It is, although there are some strong supporters of the common fisheries policy, and we met one that day, of course, didn't we, up the river, on his...
He wasn't very polite.
He wasn't very polite, was he? He was, of course, for those that don't remember, Sir Bob Geldof. And here's a little taste of what Sir Bob had to say to us.
Britain makes more money than any other country in Europe from fishing. 2, Britain has the second largest quota for fish in Europe after Denmark. 3, Britain has the third largest landings. 4th, you are no fisherman's friend. You were on the European Parliament Fishing Committee and you attended 1 out of 43 meetings. You're a fraud, Nigel. Go back down the river because you're up one without a canoe.
Well, there's Sir Bob, and in answer to his question, of course, when I was on the Fisheries Committee, it was non-legislative. It didn't affect anything. Didn't matter what we did or how we voted, because all of it was decided by the European Commission. I don't know what it was there for. It was a farce. Nowadays, in theory, it does have some power, although the British MEPs that sit on it find themselves outvoted every time. But there we are. Bob was defending the common fisheries policy, and I come to you, Aaron Brown, Head of Fishing for Leave. You know, he said that we make more money in the British fishing industry than other fleets, and we have the second largest quota. What do you have to say to Sir Bob?
Well, the thing he misses there is we should have the largest, and we should have the largest landings. Britain should be one of the premier fishing nations in the world, and we've been reduced to near destitution. Just now, although we have 50% of the international fisheries zones that surround the British Isles that we share with the EU, with Norway, and with, well, just touching Faroe, although we have 50% of the waters, we only get 25% of the fish. And when you then account for the flagships that the likes of the NFFO and that represent, where they account for 75% of the domestic British fishing industry, the indigenous British fisherman's down to about 10% of his own resources. So we've had this monumental loss of our resources. As people will remember, we had big decommissioning schemes where 60% of the UK fleet was cut up. So for Bob, as part of the metropolitan elite...
Sir Bob, please.
Sir Bob, we'll be polite to him, to stand as part of the metropolitan elite and shout down, especially some of the small-scale guys who are really struggling to keep a roof above their heads and keep their families going, and for him to have the temerity to stand there, I don't think it was a very gratifying sight at all.
No, it wasn't. And I know one of the Southend boats actually boarded Bob's vessel and a couple of the Southend fishermen. And I'm surprised they didn't push him over. I'm pleased they didn't, because as it was, I think it was a giant PR victory for fishing and for the Leave campaign. As you say, Bob quoting these figures, but forgetting about the fact that actually we've given away most of what should be ours. Let's go to Carolyn, who's calling from Hull, in East Yorkshire, and Hull, Grimsby. Of course, these were, Carolyn, just a few decades ago, ports with literally hundreds of fishing boats, weren't they?
Definitely so, Nigel. My dad fished, was a deep-sea fisherman for 45 years, and his father before that. And I've seen Hull, absolutely, it was buzzing with manufacturing, and all the docks in barrels of fish. There was very low unemployment in Hull. It was one of the main industries. And not only that, Nigel, it's not just the fishing what it has an impact on. It's also the cod liver oil industry.
Yep.
The pet industry, the cosmetic industry, all the processing factories. This is absolutely destroyed the fishing industry.
I know. And what is so sickening, Carolyn, is that you could and should have 200 miles of the North Sea that should be ours to manage. And if foreign boats want to fish there, that's fine. They buy a licence from us to do so. And when you look across, Carolyn, to the other side of the North Sea from you, to Norway, you see an industry that not only has put in place the right environmental policies, but has a thriving fishing industry. There must be a sense, I'm guessing, Carolyn, in Hull and elsewhere, there must be a sense of betrayal, effectively.
Oh, absolutely. When my dad was one of the top earners in Hull. It was never without a ship. He went on the South African Ache exhibition. He even looked after Prince Charles on board a ship.
Wow.
And it all, you know, I could tell you loads, absolutely loads, Nigel, about all this fishing.
Is it time, Carolyn? Is it time? Should we get out of the CFP as quickly as possible?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Not only that, now we need to change the size of our fishing nets.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, the fishing nets now, as the EU imposed upon us, they're throwing fish away.
I know.
Well, if you had larger fishing nets, the smaller fish could escape.
Do you know what, Carolyn? They're getting none of it right. I've got to move on. I thank you for your call, for your passion, your family history in this industry, and the sense of betrayal that places like Hull and Grimsby feel. Kevin is calling me from Blackburn. Kevin, good morning.
Hi, Nigel. Thank you very much for what you've fought for the British people to leave the European Union. Obviously, was a big UKIP supporter, and it's just ridiculous that we're catching all these fish, and even the fishermen are saying that we're having to throw them back, and they're going to die anyway.
Yes, I mean, you know, you'd have thought that perhaps an old people's home might have taken those skate wings, or a school, or we could sell them for charity, or... Yeah, I mean, you would have thought there was something could be done, rather than chucking stuff back that may not make it, Kevin, I know. But what is it with our government? You know, haven't they got the will just to say, we're going to take back what's rightfully ours?
Nigel, I've been looking at this, and from the early 60s, the politicians knew in the 70s what the European Union would become. And if people would just Google FCO 30/1048, we're not actually in the European Union legally. We're taken in the European Union illegally.
Well, yeah, but that's history. We can't change that, Kevin. That's history. We can't change it. But you know, your sense of frustration, though, I think is the same with everybody. We just want to get on with this, don't we?
Nigel, yes. I'm with a group called the White Pen Dragons, and we're going under the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights. The Queen had an oath to the people, and all the
Kevin, I wish you luck with it, mate, but I promise you, as soon as you try and get legalistic with this, you're relying on court cases and raising huge sums of money. I wish you well, but it won't work. Dear me, this is the most biased slot I've ever heard about fisheries. As an MEP for over 20 years, what have you been doing, says Nick in Seven Oaks. What can we do, Nick, when for most of that 20 years, we've had no legislative power whatsoever? This has been decided purely by the European Commission, which nobody votes for and nobody can remove. And yes, they have come for the British fishing industry and devastated it, and they may be, within a couple of weeks, about to deal a devastating blow to sea angling and coastal communities in this country, because they're coming after the anglers now too. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:30, and time for the news with Simon Conway. Nick in Seven Oaks accused me of being biased, because I'm saying the common fisheries policy has been a disaster for our industry. Well, Nick, I have asked Mr Gove and Mr Eustace, the relevant ministers, to come on this show and to defend why we should stay in the CFP, or in the CFP rules, during the transition period, and they've, I'm afraid, been a no-show. And I've just played out the arguments in favour of the CFP as articulated by the wonderful Sir Bob Geldof. So back on to the boy Joshua with Eddie from Ramsgate. I talked about Sir Bob Geldof and the flotilla, and I wonder what Eddie's response was. Well, last year, in the run-up to the referendum, I worked with Fishing for Leave, and we organised our little flotilla up the Thames, which was a big visual spectacle, and I thought I was doing my best to encourage it all, and we were met by a guy called Sir Bob Geldof. And I just wondered what your view of Sir Bob, because Sir Bob was saying that you in the fishing community have really got a great deal out of the EU.
Well, that is the biggest load of, what can we say, Geldofs. No, that is the biggest lie ever. We've been shafted, basically, over the years. We've been decimated, we've had our livelihoods taken away with quotas and bad science. And been really negative. And Geldof, to be honest, was badly informed and advised in what he was trying to put across.
Yeah, but it certainly came across as the rich telling the poor what. I mean, the thought of Bob Geldof having a row with Southend fishermen, in fact, in many ways, played into the Leave side's arguments. But people will tell me, this boat's 35 years old. if you wanted to get this boat updated, you would get EU funds to do it, wouldn't you?
I could get EU funds if I could get EU funds, but to be honest, the criteria of getting the money, the way you deal with it, is all too complicated. At the end of it, I've then got to earn my share of the grant money. Well, I have to earn a share of money to go with the grant. Well, I am not earning enough money, as it stands, to put to the grant to do my boat up to catch no fish. At the end of the day, if you're not allowed to catch any fish, what's the point in spending more money on your boat?
Right, so the people that would like to give you the money are the people who are stopping you catching fish.
Absolutely.
Right. And the one other argument that we get about fishing is that a hell of a lot of fish caught along this coast goes to the Boulogne fish market, the massive fish market in Boulogne. And they say, well, if we left the EU, they wouldn't buy our fish. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think, to be honest, if we increase the fishing limits further out, so maybe they couldn't quite get as much of our waters, then perhaps they might need our fish a little bit more, perhaps, than what they do at the moment.
Well, certainly demand for fish in Spain and France and elsewhere is a lot higher than it is here. So you're not concerned they'll still buy our fish, because otherwise where are they going to get it from?
Well, I hope that's the case, yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, and maybe, who knows, maybe the Brits might start eating a bit more fish.
Well, that is a big thing. There's a lot of fish species that are underutilised. I mean, it'd be nice if a few more chefs actually got behind the local fish that we catch and started bigging us up a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we got herrings in abundance, sprats by the billion, and no one's eating any of it, are they?
No, and I mean, it's all fish that they would eat, or used to eat traditionally, and they don't eat anymore. And that's a bit silly, really, and it's a shame, because the sea is plentiful with all that sort of fish.
Well, let's hope that with a bit of education. I remember Rick Stein cooking gurnard on television, and nobody in the country had ever heard of gurnard. No restaurant sold gurnard, and now gurnard is a highly prized thing. So I think with a bit of education, things could change.
I think you're right. I think at the end of the day, it'll be good.
Well, that was me out with Eddie on Boy Joshua at Ramsgate, and you can see all the videos and shots of the nets going out, the nets coming back, what happened to the skate, the lobsters, the crabs, etc. Go to lbc.co.uk and get a feeling for how these guys earn their living, albeit the day I was out with them, the weather was rather nice. I'm not so sure I'd have enjoyed it quite so much out there in February, with sleet and a northeasterly wind. Now, angling. Since Magna Carta, one of our freeborn rights has been that the land between the high tide mark and the low tide mark has been common land. And we can go out there and we can fish and we can pretty much do whatever we want. Sea angling used to claim up to 1 million people a year that engaged in it. A lot of that was people in holiday in Cornwall or West Wales going out for sort of an hour's mackerel fishing or whatever. But what is for certain, though it has declined, there are at least 250,000, probably more people, who like going to fish for bass, that lovely silvery sea bass. But, over the last few years, the European Commission have been limiting what anglers can do, and I understand they now face quite a big threat. And joining me on the phone is Barney Wright, the former editor of Total Sea Fishing magazine. Barney, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
So I understand there's a big meeting going to take place in Brussels in a couple of weeks' time where bass angling is on the agenda. What is the proposal?
Well, the proposal, my gathering, is that bass fishing was pretty much banned for RSA, if you want to look at it that way, because... RSA being recreational sea angling, yeah. Yes, recreational sea angling, yes, because at the moment we're limited to no take in the first 6 months of the year, then we're allowed one bass per session in the second part of the year. And next year they're proposing that basically we can't have any at all. In fact, it looks a bit like a moratorium for the recreational sea anglers, whereas the commercial fleet apparently will be able to continue to keep fish. I don't think that's strictly fair. I don't blame anybody for it. All I blame, not the commercial sector, it's not their fault. I blame the EU and the ridiculous CFP. It
is an amazing situation that for the last couple of years, so right now, if I was to leave this studio and head off to go bass fishing, and I might have a good day, I might have a bad day. In fact, I've generally learnt with fishing, more days disappoint with a rod and line than excite. But I'm only allowed to take one fish home, and if it's the first 6 months of the year, I can't take any. And what Barney Wright is saying is that next year, it could be that we're not allowed to keep a single fish. So Barney, clearly the European Commission must think that anglers are catching a lot of bass.
Well, you and I both know very well, I mean, as you said a minute ago, the reality is you go to the beach, you're allowed to keep one bass per day. And, you know, when you speak to most anglers, they say, oh, I had one last week, you know, and it's one every week they might catch if they're regular fishermen. It's not as easy. As they say that you have stories that there are bass everywhere. Yes, there are in certain places in the sea, but clearly stock control needs to be, but not to what's being proposed. But I believe that since RSA would daft enough to be drawn into the common fisheries policy, they're seriously paying the price.
They're paying a very big price. And, of course, there's also the boat fishing element of this. You know, you look at ports like Littlehampton, you look at ports, you know, going down the West Country. I mean, some of them have got sort of 20 boats with skippers, with crews. Anglers travel from all over the country. They spend a lot of money in the local guest houses, the hotels, the pubs afterwards in some cases, the tackle shops, the bait collectors. What I can see, Barney, is that for someone to go onto a boat out for a day's fishing in the Channel or North Sea or wherever it is, frankly, with the petrol to and forth and the bits and bobs, there's not much change out of £100 for a day out. But that £100 per person, perhaps there are 5 or 6 people on that boat, that is, some would argue, Barney, right, that's putting as much money into local seaside communities as commercial fishing is.
Well, mathematically, it's very plausible. In fact, very possible, because the money is always coming in and not going out. I mean, recreational seeing anglers have never claimed a penny for loss of capture or anything. So, but it's a very ridiculous situation that recreational sea anglers find themselves in. I mean, you know the score as well as I do. I mean, you fish as much as me, and what can I say? It just makes my blood boil.
No, it does. And I understand that the Angling Trust, which has been formed to sort of support anglers' rights, they are lobbying and petitioning, I think, to try and get some common sense into these negotiations in December, yeah?
Yes, it seems to me they're battling on the right side this time, yes.
Good. Barney Wright, former editor of Total Sea Fishing magazine, thank you. So that's it, folks. You can't even go out and take a couple of bass home for tea. You're breaking European Union law. I thought we voted to leave. I thought this nonsense was behind us. One of the reasons George Eustace, I'm sure is not on the programme this morning, is in Aberdeen. I had a head-to-head with him on this in private. We were both backing the Leave campaign. I wasn't going to have a public row. And I said, George, if people on a good day, and maybe 1 in 3 days is a good day, are only allowed for the last 6 months of the year to take one fish home, do you think they'll really go on fishing? He said, well, that sounds like a pretty good deal for me. I won't tell you what I said in return. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 11:45.
Farage Show on LBC.
Well, back on Eddie's boat, back on Boy Joshua, out of Ramsgate, we talk not just about the fact that the quota he's been given means he effectively can't earn a living. Also, another problem out there is the seas are littered with rubbish. Eddie, explain this. Big debate raging at the moment. Pictures on television of whales washed up dead, and they cut the intestines open, and there's miles and miles of plastic in them.
Yep.
I mean, how much rubbish, how much litter do you see?
Not as much as we used to. The days of the P&O ferries and the Townsend Torreson ferries and the plastic cups in the 1980s, we don't see anywhere near as much plastic on the seabed in our nets that we used to do. I mean, obviously, you do see plastic bottles, more of a shore-based thing, but actually in the sea, where we're not finding any more plastic doing what we're doing than there has been in the past. In fact, a lot less.
That's interesting. I mean, maybe other parts of the world vary. And tell us, you know, over the years, putting up your nets, and today we've seen skates and lobsters and crabs, but what are the unusual things you've seen over the years coming up in your nets?
Motorbikes, push bikes, shopping trolleys, washing machines, and a few years ago some guys on a trawler had a 2CV car.
And what about war relics? Because we're kind of in bomb alley from World War II here, aren't we?
Oh yes, I mean, it's not unusual to get shells. Personally, we've had a £500 mine. Other people get £1,000 parachute bombs. Over the years, quite a lot of stuff.
So you've got to be a little bit careful when you're hauling those nets then?
Yes.
And tell me, I mean, you know, obviously we're in the narrowest part of the channel here just about, but under international law, up to 12 miles post-Brexit should be just our fishing waters. Do you think that's realistic or not?
I'd like to think it's a possibility. Personally, I don't think we'll ever get it, but I'm hoping we will.
Well, I do, yes, I must admit, for the sake of this industry, I do. And finally, and we've had a great morning out and learnt a lot, have you got a message for Michael Gove?
Do your best for us, but make sure you do, otherwise we won't forget the ballot box.
Well, I think Michael Gove, actually, who comes from Aberdeen, who comes from a family where his father was a fish merchant, I'm sure Michael Gove wants to do his best, and George Eustace represents a Cornish constituency, and hey, fishing's pretty big in that county. I'm sure they want to do their best. The trouble is, it looks like we're going to be trapped into a transition, and if we're trapped into that transition, under the current rules we've got, we will have tens of thousands of anglers not bothering to go angling, which will put people out of work in coastal communities, and we will see more of our commercial fishing boats closed. I think it's urgent that we leave the CFP as quickly as we possibly can. But I want to bring in just one more environmental aspect to this, because it does matter. Fish stocks matter, rubbish in our seas matter, all of this stuff matters. You know, what we want to have is an industry that is managed properly and sensibly. Pulse fishing, and it was mentioned the other week. A lady phoned in from Lowestoft the other week and mentioned pulse fishing. I'm with Aaron Brown, head of fishing, I believe. Just tell us what pulse fishing is, please.
Pulse fishing is a Dutch invention. Their big fishing vessels that were fishing hard in the southern North Sea became inefficient, towing big heavy chain mats, 10 tons of chain along the seabed. And what they came up with was they would use electrical wires to tickle the fish out the bottom. And what our members, certainly in the east coast of England, are seeing is in total environmental devastation of the southern North Sea. Because, of course, it's not just electrocuting fish, it's electrocuting all the other marine life around it. And that's killing the feeding, it's killing the fish. People are retrieving fish with their insides burst out, their backs broken. It is a horrific way of catching fish, done to try and keep an inefficient Dutch industry going. There's obviously big fishing companies across there. The Dutch have a lot of flagships in Britain as well, boats that are registered here that have lobbied our government, and it's really a type of fishing that's barbaric. It's got to stop.
There are no British-owned
No.
boats conducting pulse fishing, but it's allowed to happen inside our waters because the European Commission have this as an acceptable method.
Well, the worst thing about it is it's not even an acceptable method. It was meant to be for a trial, for a limited period of time, for a limited number of boats, 5% of the Dutch fleet. It's now at 28% of the fleet, 100 boats, and it's been going on for 10 years. The British government has ignored it, partly because it's not on its doorstep, partly because it can't do anything about it, and big lobby groups and some environmental NGOs are culpable in this as well, have allowed pulse fishing to go on, and it has absolutely smashed the southern North Sea.
Where is Greenpeace on this? I mean, Greenpeace should be screaming blue murder.
Well, they should be.
About this. And yes, you're right. As I say, the phone call from Lowestoft we had, absolutely backing up what you're saying. I hope that once we do take back control of our territorial waters, that we ban things like pulse fishing. Would the British fishing industry support that?
Oh, absolutely. And I'd say we are far more environmentally sustainable in what the Dutch were doing. You can't replace one bad job with another. And really, the damage it's doing is incredible. Nobody in the British public would accept if we were going into fields and tasering sheep. So I don't see why we should be tasering fish either.
I'd love to see some more video of this, I really would. I mean, on lbc.co.uk you can see all the pictures and videos from my trip today. I may have to do another one to get to the bottom of pulse fishing. Let's go to David, who's from Cornwall, who I understand is a fisherman. David, good morning.
Yeah, morning, Nigel.
Morning. So what do you do, David?
Well, I'm a fisherman. I work out in Newlyn. I work a trawler out in Newlyn.
Yep.
And just like to first say, just thanks for all the support you've given us, Nigel. It's very much appreciated right across the fishing industry.
Well, I'm trying my damnedest, David, but I'm getting a bit worried. I have to say, I had a wander around Newlyn in August of this year, and have to say, it's looking a bit sad, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's in need of investment. I mean, that's ongoing, and I think the important thing to remember in all this is how forward-thinking and innovative the British fishing industry is. We generally lead the way in Europe on scientific issues and issues like you've just brought up on your programme about the litter. We have a scheme where all the fishermen bring their litter in, and it's all put in bags and it's taken ashore. So we're very supportive of the marine environment, and we're very proactive in the marine environment. And, we have a huge problem down in the southwest with these crazy CFP rules that are causing a huge amount of discards. And, under British coastal state status, which I'm sure we'll get, we can move into a better era of eliminating these discards. And a lot of them are created by what we call relative shares. I'm sure you've mentioned that before, but just to give you an example, an area for haddock, which is their single biggest, is their only discard, is their single biggest discard.
Yeah.
The UK has 10% of the share, and France has 60% of the share.
That's a good deal, isn't it?
we're starting off with a broken leg to start with.
So let's just, David, let's just do that again, shall we? Because the people driving their cars might not have picked that up. Just explain again how you, as a fisherman from Cornwall, how the haddock that are caught are divided up. Just explain it again.
Well, for instance, you have an EU share, so a giant pie, where the data of all that data goes into collecting that stock for that species. So 60% of that stock is shared out to the French, 10% to the UK, and 20% to Ireland. But the majority of that fish sits within 20 miles of the Cornish coast.
Wow.
So it pretty much all resides in Cornish waters. So when we go for coastal status and we invoke a zonal attachment, I would certainly hope that the scientists will know that that fish is in that area and that the UK will get a bigger slice of that pie, and then we can eliminate the discards, because the discard problem we've had for many, many years in the UK is really solely down to the fact that we do not have the right shares to be able
And David, are you concerned, because it seems to me Michael Gove and George Eustace are slightly running away from us this morning, I mean, are you concerned that if we stay within the CFP rules for a transition period that could last for years, that there may not be much of your industry left?
Well, we don't want that. I mean, the fishing industry wants to take back the 12 miles, certainly, and go to zonal coastal state, which is out to the 200 meridian line at 2019 when we leave. And I do think that's going to happen, but I think it's very important people like yourselves holding the government to account on that.
Well, we're trying. David, we're trying. I thank you for your call. And I did mention earlier that the Border Force, when we were out, approached the boat, and I think it's because the LBC producer was sort of sitting up on the bow, wearing a sort of bit like a parka. I think he sort of thought there was something dodgy going on, but they were certainly a bit surprised to see me. They really, really were. Well, look, thanks for all your calls and texts and tweets on that. And this isn't just about an industry, important though that is. It isn't just about people going angling, important though for them that is. Actually, this is about the environment too, and we must have a much more environmentally sustainable fishing method than we've got. Discards are bad enough. Pulse fishing, frankly, sounds pretty repulsive. I thank Aaron Brown. I think everyone that's been in today. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show.